What kind of time and calendars do you have where in the country that you come from? Does your clock change from time to time, or is it a constant clock? I'm Shoshana Shea, and this is another video as part of my Aliyah tips. Today the clock in Israel changed. It went back an hour. A little bit confusing. For me it's always confusing. I come from South Africa, and so in South Africa the clock fortunately is a constant. It gets confusing if you move to a country where they do change the clock, but there are all sorts of things that are confusing about this time change. The first thing is that the time change is never in the same month or the same week as it has been. That's not a constant. When I first made Aliyah, the clock was changing around Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Then they shifted it to change between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Then it was just after Sukkot. Now it's already a week after Sukkot at least, coming up to about 10 days later, and we've just had the clock change. So it's a little bit confusing. It requires one to constantly keep an eye on when is that hour going to change. We have a lot of discussion as to how much good this clock change actually does. It definitely has an effect on one's biological clock. So be aware of that, and if there's anything you can do to help your health, to help you to maintain your normal sleep pattern, to help to manage your time. It's a huge question. It's a difficulty that I've definitely had, and there are other people who also do. If you, like we are, and you work online, changing the fact that your clock is going to be changing is not only a consideration if you're going into any appointments or anything to make sure that you've got the time right, but it also becomes a concern to make sure that if you doing a consultation or you're coaching or you're teaching online to somebody somewhere else in the world, in other words, not in Israel, to make sure that their clock is going to be constant according to whatever your appointment is. If you have an appointment set for 9 o'clock routinely and now their time is going to be different, it's a case of constantly keeping an eye on the world clock to make sure what is the time where they are. Has their clock changed? Is their clock going to be constant like it is in South Africa? So time change is something that one has to get used to in Israel. And as I say, it's not something that's easy to get used to, because it's the fact that the clock changes is not a constant in terms of being around Rosh Hashanah time, Yom Kippur time, as it was when I made Aliyah. But it's, for some reason, that keeps moving. I haven't understood why the clock needs to change. I do understand in a country like Norway or Sweden, where the days become so much shorter in the winter time. But in Israel, where we have fairly decent amount of hours of daylight time, I don't understand why the clock needs to change. Time and clocks is important in the life of a Jew, and definitely in Israel for many other reasons also. Another fact that you'll find coming up, if you're living in Israel, if you're living in Jerusalem, there's a siren that goes off when it comes to candle lighting time. If you're not used to that, and it's the first Shabbat that you're going to be keeping in Jerusalem, in the holy city of Jerusalem, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's sometimes quite comforting to know you've prepared everything you need to for Shabbat. You've got yourself ready. You're already out the shower, or you're about to come out the shower, and there goes the siren. Now it's time to light your candles. It's important also because in Jerusalem, the candle lighting is 40 minutes before sunset instead of 18 minutes as it is elsewhere. So it is important to have that. Certain areas just in the outside of Jerusalem will also have the siren. Beitar Elite is one of those areas. I know in Efrat they don't have that siren going, so it depends on where you are in relation to Jerusalem as to whether that siren would go off. If you're new to hearing sirens, keep that in mind. Sometimes the siren would be music in certain areas instead of the siren, and at certain problem times in the country they don't put the siren, so keep an eye on what the time is going to need to be if it's a time when there's sirens going off for other reasons and not the siren for Shabbat. So that's another area in which time is important. Time is important for if you're needing to know about any prayer times and an announcement is made. We paid a visit to somebody just recently, and we were meeting up with them at Mincha time. If the Mincha time is set to be at a certain time that overlaps a couple of days before the clock change and a couple of days after the clock change, that can be a little bit confusing. So there are all sorts of details that start to be important for us to keep in mind and to keep an eye on the calendar all the time, on the times all the time, on the news, to know what's happening in the area of time. Talking about calendars, the calendar in Israel is something also that's going to be different. If you're used to a calendar, if you've come from a country like England or South Africa, Australia, and your calendar usually goes from January to December, there are some countries that will have school calendars which will go relatively similar to how the calendar works in Israel, but not completely the same. In Israel, you're going to find that the calendars and diaries or planners that you can purchase in the stores all go according to the Jewish calendar. So you're going to find in the stores coming out that the calendar changes. Your new diary you're going to get at the time of Tishrei, of Rosh Hashanah. There will be a little bit of overlap with the end of the year, the outgoing year, and the beginning of the new year. There usually is a little bit of overlap, but keep in mind, if you're looking out for a calendar that's going to be according to the Gregorian calendar, you're not going to find that so easily in Israel. So if that's important for you to be able to have a calendar like that, either use your Google Calendar or make sure that you're ordering a calendar online. I myself have looked into designing some planners and diaries and calendars. I haven't yet got to do so for various reasons. There's a bit of a learning curve to do the formatting correctly, but I am looking into some interesting ways to be doing calendars. Another option, of course, is ordering from somewhere like Amazon. You might find some things on Etsy, some artists on Etsy with interesting planners. Also check out other online stores. So if you're needing a Gregorian calendar, keep in mind to either have somebody that you know who's traveling to pick one up for you overseas outside of Israel, or to order it online, or get used to using your Google Calendar, which is something that I find really useful. I do always enjoy having a pocket diary that I can keep with me. It was a little bit of a transition and a little bit of getting used to switching from having the calendar always going from January to December to now going from Rosh Hashanah time, which could be September, usually around September time, and then going around again, obviously, to end of Elul and onto Rosh Hashanah. That's something that takes getting used to. If you're going to be working in any of the schools and you're working with any of the Torah observant Jews, the children who are coming from Torah observant families, there's certain schools there's a difference with a number of the schools, and if you're interested I can get into that in a different video. But I personally had a situation where I was helping a child that I was working with, we were doing a design of some drawings and making up a calendar that she could be giving as a gift for her family as we were approaching the end of the year, and something that might be meaningful for their family to put up on the wall, to put onto the fridge or something. And I started charting out, drawing with a ruler, which was much easier than trying to figure out the formatting necessary for doing a calendar. And I started naturally to work out the months according to the Gregorian calendar, and she had no idea what it was that I was doing. So quickly I realized, and I switched to the months of the Jewish calendar, and starting off with Tishrei, and we then worked through them, and we had a little bit of fun working out what the order was of the Jewish calendar, making sure that she knew the sequence, making sure that I also remembered the sequence. And of course, instead of using the numbers, we used the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which is something else one needs to get used to if you're not already used to the method of counting through the alphabet. So those are some ideas, some thoughts that one has to get used to, which can have an impact on one's life. Also keep in mind, if you've been invited out for a Shabbat meal and you've written down a certain time, make sure if the clock is changing. There was a year where the clock changed. It must have been on a Friday that the clock had changed, because on a Shabbat lunch I had a little difficulty in the first year that I made Aliyah with somebody that I went to for a Shabbat lunch. But fortunately we worked it all out. In any event, make sure that you've got all your dates correct, your times correct, and also keep in mind that one other thought related to calendars is that any public holidays in Israel are going to be according to predominantly the Chagim, the festivals, according to the Jewish calendar. And there are a couple of more secular type, like Yom HaTzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, and so on, which are not festivals that are religious holidays. They're not set down in the Torah, in the Chumash, but they have a relation to the land, and they're days that's tremendous celebration here in Israel. So any of the public holidays are going to be completely different. It takes a little bit of getting used to. If you're used to having, in England they have bank holidays, in America they have a range of different holidays. South Africa has all sorts of days, public holidays, extra days added onto the weekend. Speaking of weekends, that's one other time-related adjustments that one needs to make when coming to live in Israel, and that is the fact that the working week is pretty much going to be a 6-day week with Shabbat as your day off. If you're observing Shabbat, that's a little bit different to having a day off that you can do whatever you're wanting to do. It takes a little bit of adjusting if you're wanting to go and visit relatives elsewhere in the country. Sometimes during the year that's more possibility for one to go visiting family would be during the Chol HaMoed of Sukkot and Pesach. Shabbat, obviously, you might need to take into consideration if you're observing Shabbat and a relative isn't, or if they're observing Shabbat and you aren't, to figure out what you can do in order to still maintain your relationships with your relatives. It's obviously still important to do so, but we no longer get the 2-day weekend. Some people in Israel do have a shorter day on a Friday, or will take Friday as their day of preparation for Shabbat, and it almost becomes like a weekend, but it's very, very different to the type of weekend that one has in the diaspora, in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel. So those are some thoughts about and ideas that that one needs to keep in mind, adjustments we need to make. Takes a little bit of getting used to. Some people make that adjustment and transition far more easily than others do. I hope this given you some thoughts that's of benefit for you as you're considering or planning your Aliyah, or perhaps you've come on Aliyah already. If you have any areas that you would like me to discuss in a further video, do put a question or a comment in the comments below, and I'd be happy to see what I can do to bring out some thoughts and ideas to help you with that. In the meantime, I have a couple of other ideas that I'm working through. I do hope that you'll subscribe to this channel, click that like button, and have a look and keep a note when other videos come up in the playlist related to Aliyah tips. And of course, you're welcome to browse the other videos on this channel. This is Shoshana Shir coming to you from Jerusalem, from the holy city of Jerusalem. And with that, I wish you a very blessed day, and I look forward to sharing some other thoughts that might help you with your Aliyah in another video. Ciao for now.